welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Kim Brown in Baltimore. Now, recently there's been an increasing discussion of the possibility of creating a universal basic income, the idea of a guaranteed monthly income for all Americans. Now, this is a relatively old idea that has found advocates from across the political spectrum, from conservatives as well as liberals, and Republicans as well as Democrats, in a time when bipartisan appeal is really a rarity. However, the big question always remains how to fund such a relatively expensive program. Well, here to talk with us about this is James Boyce of the PERI, the Political Economic Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He recently co-authored with Peter Barnes a piece for the Triple Crisis site called $200 a month for everyone, universal income from the universal assets. There's a link there that you can check out. And some of our questions are getting ready to get started now. So James, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So James, what is the universal basic income?
Well, the basic idea is that people should be able to receive a certain amount of money as a guaranteed source of income. It should be paid out to every man, woman, and child. It could be paid monthly, it could be paid quarterly, it could even be paid annually, but probably monthly is the best way to do it. And the way this would be done in a country like the United States would be primarily through electronic transfers into bank accounts or onto cards, which is the way that most recurrent federal payments to individuals are dispersed. Social Security, veterans benefits, etc., are all these days done electronically. So that's the basic idea.
So why have so many people been talking about this? And really the big question remains, what are the big obstacles to making sure that guaranteed income for all comes to pass?
Well, I think the reason people have been talking about it is that it really has a lot of appeal to a lot of people, including even to some of our politicians and political leaders. On the conservative side of the political spectrum, it's appealing to people who would like to simplify the ways in which federal support to individuals and households is provided, to move away from the sometimes Byzantine bureaucratic procedures that we currently have. Also to move away from means testing, which requires a lot of administrative effort to figure out who's eligible and who's not eligible to receive these payments. Universal basic income, like Social Security or Medicare, is universal. It's available to everybody. And because it's universal and provided in cash, it avoids the kinds of charges of paternalism that sometimes are levied, particularly by conservatives, against government support programs for individuals and families. On the liberal end of the spectrum, I think its appeal and its increasing appeal stems from the realization that middle-class jobs aren't really paying enough anymore to really provide a secure livelihood for many families. And that, coupled with the realization that income inequality has been growing across the country, has led to a search for new ideas of ways to try to some extent at least, level the playing field and support households in the face of uncertain and sometimes sluggish labor demand.
So James, how can the first problem, finding the money to actually pay for this, be solved?
Well, that's, of course, the biggest stumbling block. And there's a great deal of political resistance in the United States to the idea of taxation, especially for redistribution. So on the one hand, you have the appeal of universal basic income, but on the other hand, you have the opposite, the resistance to the idea of taxation for this purpose. What Peter Barnes and I suggest in the piece you mentioned is a different way of funding the universal basic income, funding it from what we call universal basic assets. That is to say, types of wealth that we all own in common, really in equal and common measure, but that currently we don't receive income from because we don't charge for using this wealth, for using these assets. Let me give you two quick examples. One is the limited space that we have in the atmosphere for absorbing various kinds of pollution, like greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, which are the main source of global climate change. Many economists and environmental policy folks have recommended that we put a price on carbon emissions as a way to provide incentives to reduce our use of carbon, increase investments in energy efficiency, in renewable, clean energy, etc. But one of the questions that poses is where the money will go. If we put a price on these emissions, which is ultimately going to raise the price of gasoline and electricity and so on, who's going to get the money? The money's not going to disappear. And what we propose is that money should be returned to the people, to the public. It shouldn't go to the government. It shouldn't go to the polluters as windfall profits through cap and trade, which gives away permits for free and lets firms trade among themselves. Instead, there should be either an auction system for permits if there's a cap, or a tax with clear targets for emissions reductions that lead to automatic increases in the tax level if those targets aren't achieved. And the money that's collected should go straight back to the American people in the form of equal per capita dividends based on the principle that we all own our country's limited carbon absorptive capacity, our share of the environment in common and equal measure. We're the rightful owners. We should get the income from using that wealth. So the system would be people pay in proportion to their use of that carbon sink, and we receive back the money based on the principle of common ownership. A second example, and I'll try to be quicker on this one, is the financial and legal infrastructure that helps to underpin our economy. This is not natural wealth. In this case, it's socially created wealth. But that wealth is really what underpins the possibility for people to make great fortunes in our country. And some of the people who've made great fortunes, like Warren Buffett, have explicitly recognized this. We believe that by charging for the use of that infrastructure, for example, by having a fee on financial transactions, a modest fee, that again could have some beneficial effects in terms of, in this case, stabilizing financial markets, but it could also generate the income that would be used to provide basic, universal basic income to everyone in the country.
James, don't we already see examples of variations of this in some of the Gulf states in the Middle East where citizens receive some sort of stipend or some sort of dividend off of the revenue generated from oil and gas sales? And doesn't Alaska have something similar to this as well? Obviously in a different direction, but the same premise that each citizen in the state or each citizen in the given country receives a check from the state because of the money that they've been able to generate off the state or the country's natural resources?
That's right. That's right. We don't have to look overseas to find it. We only have to look as far as Alaska, which, by the way, as you know, is a red state. Alaska, again, testifying to the wide political appeal of such a policy. When Alaska started pumping oil, its governor, who was a Republican named Jay Hammond, proposed the creation of the Alaska Permanent Fund. And royalties from the extraction of Alaska's oil go into that fund. And among other things, the fund pays out to every woman, man, and child in the state of Alaska every year an annual dividend, their share of the return to the extraction of Alaska's oil, based on the principle that that oil belongs to all Alaskans. It's the commonwealth of the people of Alaska. And it's not a difficult thing to do this. You can, if your viewers want to look, just Google Alaska Permanent Fund. You can go to the website. You can see the little PDF form that Alaskans fill out in order to qualify for their dividend. The highest payout, which was about $2,000 per person a year a few years ago, was under Governor Sarah Palin. This is a popular program amongst Alaskans, as you can imagine, across the political spectrum. Now, there is one difference I should mention between the Alaska Permanent Fund and what Peter Barnes and I are proposing with respect to carbon emissions, and that is the following: that the Alaska Permanent Fund, because it's based on extracting oil, gives Alaskans an incentive to want to extract more oil. It's one of the reasons why oil extraction in Alaska is popular, is it provides revenue and income for everybody across the state. Everybody, not just the people involved in the industry, everybody, thanks to the dividends from the permanent fund. So that's an incentive to extract more oil. Quite the opposite, putting a price on carbon emissions provides an incentive to burn less oil and to burn less coal and natural gas as well. Because it gets more expensive to do it, you don't burn as much of it. And so the money in this case is coming not from pumping more, but from burning less. And in fact, because the rate at which prices would rise is faster than the rate at which emissions would be reduced, the tighter the caps, the higher the price on emission, the more money there will be to distribute to the people. So what such a system would create would be incentives for the American people to demand tighter caps, higher prices on carbon, because that would mean more money in their pockets.
But what about the potential of people being disincentivized towards working? You know, if people are getting a check every month, as some conservatives have criticized, you know, liberal governments, et cetera, about the so-called nanny state, wouldn't this be in effect creating a nanny state?
Not at all. I think that's a really good question to pose, though, because it does come up periodically. So we're not talking here about a nanny state, nor are we talking here about handouts or free gifts. What we're talking about is returning to people the money that comes from uses of assets that we all own or should own in common. So it's not about handing out free money, it's about not letting people use those assets for free. That's the real handout. When people can use our atmosphere for free, when people can use our financial and legal infrastructure that we have created together for free, we're failing to collect. We're giving a handout to them. And this is about paying as you go, which is really, I would say, part of the American way. Now, as far as incentives to work go, look, the amounts of money here are not going to be so huge that people aren't going to have an incentive to work to provide a better standard of living for themselves and for their families. In our proposal, what we're talking about is maybe $200 per person per month. So that's $1,200 a year for a family of four. That's getting up around $5,000. It's nothing to sneeze at. It's real money. It's a big help to struggling families, but it's not so much that people would not want to work. Now, it's true that it might be that some people would no longer have to do work that they really hate, or at least not do it as cheaply as they now do. And if that happens, that's a good thing. It might also be that some people now are able to do work they really love, even though it doesn't pay quite as much, and that's a good thing too. So I wouldn't worry too much that we're going to become a nation of slackers just because we're charging for use of the wealth we own in common. I think, on the contrary, this actually helps to enable people to do the kinds of work that they really want to do.
Indeed, and as you said, $200 a month is hardly an incentive to stop working altogether, given that it would not even pay everyone's rent. But how high would such a program have to be to have a real impact without draining the economy?
Well, it's not a matter really of draining the economy, because the money that's being paid out is being paid for uses of assets that we already have. I'd say quite the contrary from draining the economy. As I've mentioned, charging for use of these things actually is going to make our economy healthier, because the basic principle on which a market-based economy is organized is that prices reflect values. Prices reflect what things are worth. And if we don't put a price, for example, on dumping greenhouse pollution into our atmosphere, we're failing to send a price signal, and we risk degrading that resource, that atmosphere. We're not only failing to collect what is due from use of a resource that we all own in common, but we're also facilitating the abuse of that resource. Similarly, with financial transaction fees, charging a modest fee for financial transactions, for sales of derivatives and stocks and so on, the amount of money that's collected could be quite substantial, could be more than the very modest calculations that we've made in our piece, depending on the scale of the fees. But the effect of that would not be to really drain the economy. The effect of that, quite the contrary, would be to reduce the volatility in financial markets, which actually destabilizes the economy and can have some really unfortunate effects. So the ways in which we would be raising money are ways that would actually, I believe, strengthen our economy rather than weaken it.
So James, you're an economist. I know you've crunched the numbers. I mean, how much money would have to be raised in order to pay for this?
Well, if you're talking about $200 a month per person, if that were that's sort of the illustrative number we use in our piece, partly just for the convenience that that's what you get in the game of Monopoly when you go past go, right? And it helps to ensure that people stay in the game the same way this would help to ensure that people are part of our economy. To generate $200 a month or $1,200 a year for a population of a little over 300 million people in the United States would be about $300 billion a year. So that's significant money. It's money that we could obtain through the types of user fees that I've described, by charging for carbon emissions, by charging on financial transactions, and similar kinds of policies by charging actually for the use of publicly owned resources. Our public forests and our public lands are used now for forest harvesting and mineral extraction, and often the prices paid for those resources are pretty low due to what I would describe as sweetheart deals between the extractive businesses and the government. By charging the real value of those resources, again, we could generate money. So I don't think it would be by any means impossible to generate incomes large enough to provide a significant universal basic income to every American. I think we could do it. It's just a matter of making our political leaders take action, making them in a way put our money where their mouths are. Frederick Douglass once said that power doesn't concede anything without a demand. It never has and it never will. And I think that's true. So if we're going to make this idea a reality, an idea which, as I said, has really wide support across the political spectrum in an era where that's unusual and where we need ideas and policies that unite us rather than dividing us, I think we'll have to get together to make it happen. We'll have to get together and demand that our representatives in Congress on both sides of the aisle pass the legislation that would create universal basic income from our joint ownership of universal basic assets.
If you want to contextualize economics, you can't go wrong with the Monopoly reference. We've been speaking with James Boyce of the Political Economy Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. You should check out the new study he co-authored with Peter Barnes. It's a piece, actually. It appears on the Triple Crisis site, and it's called $200 a Month for Everyone, Universal Income from Universal Assets. James, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Very nice to chat with you.
You as well. And thank you for watching the Real News Network.